And he would always tell Zeppelin, I'm leaving the band. I can't go back to America again. I can't do all that.
In the world of hard rock and heavy metal music, few guitarists were as respected and feared as Ritchie Blackmore. The mysterious mastermind behind the famous bands Deep Purple and Rainbow was not just a pioneer who helped create heavy metal music through powerful guitar riffs and classical music influences. He was also known as one of rock music's most difficult perfectionists, with a legendary bad temper and impossibly high standards that made him dislike other guitarists he thought were inferior, pretentious, or simply not good enough to share the stage with him. Behind his medieval obsessions and dramatic stage performances was a classically trained musician who saw guitar playing as serious art that required discipline, innovation, and real talent. Blackmore did not just dislike certain ways of playing guitar. He actively hated what he saw as technical show-offs, musicians who sold out for commercial success, and players who had betrayed everything he believed rock guitar should represent. This is the story of the shocking truth about 7 guitarists who reportedly made Ritchie Blackmore's blood boil. The Hartford-born legend who gave us classic songs had some very strong opinions about his fellow musicians, and he never held back his harsh judgments of guitarists he considered beneath contempt. Steve Vai, the technical perfectionist. At number 8 on this list is the ultimate clash between natural artistry and calculated perfection. Steve Vai, the technically flawless virtuoso known for his surgical precision and elaborate compositions, reportedly drove Ritchie Blackmore to fury through what Blackmore saw as the complete mechanization of guitar playing that destroyed rock music's essential humanity and emotional spontaneity. The conflict allegedly began when Vai emerged from Frank Zappa's band as a guitar hero in the 1980s. According to rock journalist Stephen R. Osen, Blackmore reportedly told fellow musicians that Steve had turned guitar playing into a computer program, becoming so obsessed with technical perfection that he had forgotten music was supposed to have soul and danger, not surgical precision. What bothered Blackmore was Vai's clinical approach to rock guitar and performance. While Blackmore built his reputation on unpredictable, emotionally charged playing that could shift from beautiful to terrifying within seconds, Vai was achieving success with what Blackmore reportedly called laboratory rock. Perfectly executed compositions that prioritized technical achievement over genuine musical expression and emotional authenticity. Blackmore saw Vai's approach as everything wrong with modern guitar playing. Where rock music should be wild, dangerous, and emotionally raw, Vai represented a sterile, calculated approach that removed all the human elements that made rock music powerful. To Blackmore, this was not evolution, but the death of rock guitar's essential spirit. Yngwie Malmsteen, the classical pretender. Coming in at number 7 is perhaps the most ironic hatred on this list. Yngwie Malmsteen, the Swedish neoclassical virtuoso who claimed to revolutionize guitar playing through Baroque-influenced compositions, reportedly became one of Ritchie Blackmore's most despised targets despite their shared classical influences and similar theatrical approaches to rock music. The animosity allegedly began in the mid-1980s when Malmsteen burst onto the scene claiming to be the greatest guitarist who ever lived. According to rock journalist Malcolm Dome, Blackmore reportedly told session musicians that this Swedish peacock thought he had invented classical guitar in rock music, but Blackmore had been incorporating Bach into heavy music when Malmsteen was still learning nursery rhymes, and he was doing it wrong anyway. What particularly infuriated Blackmore was Malmsteen's approach to classical integration and his outrageous public statements. And while Blackmore had spent years subtly weaving Renaissance and Baroque elements into rock compositions, Malmsteen was achieving fame with what Blackmore reportedly called classical music rape, academic exercises that showed off technique without understanding the emotional core that made classical music powerful in rock contexts. The rivalry represented Blackmore's contempt for what he saw as shallow musical scholarship combined with insufferable egotism. To Blackmore, Malmsteen was a pretender who had taken classical music and turned it into a circus act. missing entirely the deeper emotional and spiritual connections that made classical influences meaningful in rock music. Kirk Hammett, the speed metal destroyer. Crashing in at number 6 is the generational warfare that defined metal's evolution from classical influence to speed-obsessed aggression. Kirk Hammett, Metallica's lead guitarist and one of thrash metal's most recognizable faces, reportedly earned Ritchie Blackmore's contempt for what the Deep Purple legend saw as the bastardization of everything he had created in heavy music's foundational years. The hatred allegedly began when Metallica emerged as leaders of the thrash movement in the early 1980s. According to metal historian Martin Popoff, Blackmore reportedly told industry insiders that Kirk and his speed metal friends had taken everything they built with Deep Purple and turned it into musical chaos, replacing melody and dynamics with mindless aggression, and calling it evolution. What infuriated Blackmore was thrash metal's approach to heaviness and composition. While Blackmore had pioneered heavy metal through classically influenced arrangements, dynamic song structures, and sophisticated guitar work, Metallica was achieving massive success with what Blackmore reportedly called punk rock played louder, aggressive speed that sacrificed musical sophistication for pure energy and volume. To Blackmore, thrash metal represented everything wrong with the younger generation of metal musicians. They had taken the foundation he and his contemporaries had built and stripped away all the musical intelligence, leaving only noise and aggression. It was not progress, but regression, abandoning the artistry that made heavy metal a legitimate musical form. The image over substance. Sliding into number 5 is the ultimate confrontation between authentic artistry and manufactured rock stardom. Guns N' Roses' iconic top-hat-wearing guitarist reportedly became one of Ritchie Blackmore's most despised targets through what Blackmore saw as the triumph of image over substance in the 1980s rock commercial explosion. The feud allegedly began when Guns N' Roses achieved massive success in the late 1980s, with their combination of heavy music and rock star glamour. According to rock journalist Jeff Barton, Blackmore reportedly told colleagues that Slash thought wearing a top hat and sunglasses made him mysterious, but he was just another pretty boy playing blues rock and calling it dangerous. Real guitar mystique came from genuine artistry, not costume department nonsense. What particularly galled Blackmore was Slash's approach to guitar heroics and celebrity. While Blackmore had built his reputation through genuine innovation, classical influences, and unpredictable artistic vision, Slash was achieving superstar status with what Blackmore reportedly called MTV metal, carefully crafted image and accessible songwriting designed for maximum commercial appeal rather than artistic advancement. Blackmore saw Slash as representing everything that was wrong with 1980s rock music. The focus had shifted from musical innovation and artistic integrity to creating a marketable image and writing songs that would sell records. To Blackmore, this was the death of rock as an art form replaced by rock as a commercial product. Burning into number 4 is perhaps the most shocking rivalry in guitar innovation history. Eddie Van Halen, the Dutch-American virtuoso who revolutionized rock guitar with his explosive finger-tapping technique, reportedly became Ritchie Blackmore's most envied and resented competitor through what Blackmore saw as the triumph of athletic showmanship over genuine musical artistry. The conflict allegedly began after Van Halen's groundbreaking 1978 debut album transformed rock guitar expectations overnight. According to Guitar World editor Brad Talinsky, Blackmore reportedly told session musicians that Eddie had turned guitar playing into a bloody circus act, confusing athletic ability with musical expression, and now every teenager thought showing off equaled artistry. What infuriated Blackmore was Van Halen's approach to innovation and performance. While Blackmore had spent years developing sophisticated classical rock fusion and dynamic compositions, Van Halen was achieving massive success with what Blackmore reportedly called musical gymnastics. technical wizardry that prioritized impressive fingerwork over genuine songwriting and emotional depth. The rivalry represented Blackmore's belief that Van Halen had corrupted guitar playing's artistic purpose. He reportedly saw Eddie as turning genuine innovation into entertainment spectacle, making technical achievement more important than musical beauty and compositional sophistication that defined truly great guitar artistry. To Blackmore, Van Halen represented the moment when guitar playing stopped being about music and became about athletic performance. The focus shifted from creating beautiful, meaningful compositions to impressing audiences with physical feats on the instrument. Jeff Beck, the arrogant experimenter. Sliding into number 3 is the most bitter professional rivalry on this list. Jeff Beck, the innovative virtuoso known for his experimental approach and technical mastery, reportedly became Ritchie Blackmore's most personal enemy through decades of competition and what Blackmore saw as Beck's arrogant dismissal of anyone he considered technically inferior. The animosity allegedly began during their overlapping time in the British blues scene of the 1960s. According to rock historian John Mole, Blackmore reportedly told fellow musicians that Jeff thought his technique made him superior to everyone else, but he had forgotten that music was supposed to move people emotionally, not just impress them with finger exercises and experimental noise. What made this rivalry particularly venomous was their competing approaches to guitar innovation and musical leadership. While Blackmore was building his reputation through classical influences and dynamic heavy rock compositions, Beck was achieving acclaim with what Blackmore reportedly called intellectual masturbation, highly technical experimental music that prioritized innovation over emotional connection and compositional strength. The feud reportedly continued for decades, with both guitarists taking subtle digs at each other in interviews. Blackmore allegedly maintained that Beck had confused complexity with artistry while viewing Beck's experimental phase as a betrayal of rock guitar's essential power and emotional directness. To Blackmore, Beck represented the intellectual approach to guitar playing that removed all the passion and emotion that made rock music powerful. Beck was more interested in impressing other musicians than in connecting with audiences or creating meaningful musical experiences. Jimmy Page, the credit thief. Burning into number 2 is the ultimate British rock rivalry that defined an entire generation's approach to heavy music. Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin's mystical mastermind, reportedly became Ritchie, Blackmore's most bitter enemy through what Blackmore saw as shameless theft of credit for innovations that belonged to Deep Purple and other genuine heavy music pioneers. The feud allegedly began in the late 1960s, when both guitarists were emerging as leaders of Britain's heavy rock movement. According to rock journalist Chris Welch, Blackmore reportedly told industry insiders that Jimmy was a clever session player who had convinced everyone he invented heavy rock, but he was just playing blues louder and calling it innovation. Real heavy music required genuine composition and classical understanding, not stolen riffs and mystical posturing. What made Blackmore's hatred particularly intense was Page's approach to heavy music and public image. While Blackmore was genuinely pioneering classical rock fusion and sophisticated heavy compositions, Page was achieving massive success with what Blackmore reportedly called blues rock theater, elaborate mystical imagery that disguised relatively simple musical approaches as profound artistic statements. The rivalry represented Blackmore's belief that Page had stolen credit for genuine innovations, while building a career on what Blackmore allegedly called borrowed power and manufactured mystery, making Page's success a betrayal of authentic heavy music development and classical rock fusion artistry. To Blackmore, Page was the ultimate fraud. A competent musician who had built a legendary reputation by taking credit for other people's innovations and wrapping them in mystical imagery to make them seem more profound than they actually were. Eric Clapton, the ultimate fraud. Taking the top spot is the ultimate betrayal that shattered Ritchie Blackmore's faith in guitar heroism authenticity. Eric Clapton, the blues purist once called God by his fans, reportedly became Blackmore's most hated guitarist through what Blackmore saw as the ultimate fraud, a technically limited player who achieved legendary status through media manipulation and shameless appropriation of American blues without genuine innovation or classical advancement. The hatred allegedly began in the mid-1960s British blues scene where both guitarists were competing for recognition. According to music journalist Robert Greenfield, Blackmore reportedly told session musicians that Eric played the same 3 blues licks slower than everyone else, and somehow the press called him a god. Real guitar artistry required classical knowledge, innovative composition, and genuine technical advancement, not just copying American blues players note for note. What made Blackmore's contempt particularly venomous was Clapton's media image versus his actual musical contributions. While Blackmore was incorporating classical elements and developing sophisticated rock compositions, Clapton was achieving superstar status with what Blackmore reportedly called blues museum curation, faithful reproduction of traditional American blues without adding any genuine innovation or advancing guitar artistry beyond simple repetition. To Blackmore, Clapton represented everything wrong with the music industry and media. Here was a guitarist with limited technical ability and no real innovations being hailed as one of the greatest players of all time, while truly innovative musicians like himself were overlooked or underappreciated. Clapton's success proved that marketing and media manipulation were more important than actual musical ability or artistic contribution. Blackmore saw Clapton as a fraud who had built his entire career on copying other musicians' work without adding anything new or meaningful. The fact that Clapton was considered a guitar god while playing simple blues licks was, to Blackmore, proof that the music industry had completely lost its way and no longer valued real artistry or innovation. The deeper meaning. These rivalries reveal much about Ritchie Blackmore's artistic philosophy and what he valued in rock music. Throughout all these conflicts, certain themes emerge that show what Blackmore truly cared about in guitar playing and rock music in general.